The fluorescent lights hummed their eternal song through the corridors of Sacred Heart Hospital. Grace Callahan pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway of the East Wing, the squeaking wheel announcing her presence like a faithful companion. 15 years of these same floors, these same walls, these same sounds that had become the rhythm of her life. She was 58 now, though her hands told a different story. They were the hands of someone much older, weathered and marked by years of labor. Calluses lined her palms. Her knuckles bore the permanent redness of constant exposure to cleaning chemicals. But Grace never complained. These hands had purpose. The cart's contents were simple.
He's stable, but
Spray
we need to
bottles filled
talk.
with
What is it?
disinfectant,
I'm right
rolls of
here.
paper
We need to be
towels,
honest.
Is he
trash
okay?
bags folded neatly in the bottom compartment, a mop that had seen better days but still did its job, and tucked into the corner, wrapped carefully in a clean cloth, was the only thing that truly mattered to Grace. A silver medallion on a delicate chain. She paused outside room 412, her reflection catching in the small window of the door. Gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, deep lines around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and silent tears, a face that most people looked past without seeing. Grace had become invisible over the years, and she had learned to appreciate the freedom that invisibility provided. Inside room 412 machines beeped steadily. The sound was familiar, almost comforting. Grace had heard that rhythm thousands of times. It was the sound of life hanging in the balance of bodies, fighting battles that most people would never understand. She knocked softly before entering. Professional courtesy, even though the room appeared empty of visitors at this early morning hour. The hallway clock read 5:30 a.m. Grace always started her shift before the official time. She had learned long ago that the quiet hours before dawn were when the hospital truly revealed itself. When the administrative noise faded and only the essential remained, life, death, and the thin space between them where miracles sometimes happened. Her mind drifted backward and as she began her routine. 15 years ago, this same hospital had been the site of her greatest loss. Robert Callahan, Bobby she had called him, the man who had taught her what love meant, what partnership looked like, what it felt like to build a life with someone who saw you, truly saw you, even when the rest of the world looked away. The memory came unbidden, but sharp, like it always did. The oncology ward, Bobby's room, the smell of antiseptic failing to mask the underlying scent of sickness. His hand in hers so thin by the end that she feared holding it too tightly, afraid she might break the bones that had once been strong enough to lift her off her feet. "Take care of David," Bobby had whispered in those final hours. His voice was barely more than breath. "And Grace, promise me something else." She had leaned closer, her tears falling onto their joined hands. "Don't stop living. Don't let this make you bitter. The world needs your light." He had died at 3 in the morning. The machines had made different sounds then. Urgent sounds. Sounds that brought nurses running. But Grace had known before they arrived. She had felt the moment his spirit left, felt the weight of his absence settle into her bones like winter cold. The medical bills had come later. $47,000. An amount that might as well have been $47 million for a widow with an 18-year-old son and no college degree. David had been accepted to Boston University, full scholarship for academics, but living expenses were still beyond their reach. Grace had sold their house, sold Bobby's truck, sold everything that could be converted to cash. It still wasn't enough. David had deferred his enrollment, found work at a warehouse. The light in his eyes had dimmed a little that day, and Grace had felt like she was failing both the men she loved, the one in the grave and the one trying to build a future. She had taken the first job that would have her, cleaning staff at Sacred Heart Hospital. The irony wasn't lost on her, returning to the place where Bobby had died, but Grace had discovered something unexpected in those early days. Being in the hospital surrounded by sickness and healings didn't make her bitter. It made her feel closer to Bobby. It made her feel like she could still honor his last request. Don't stop living. The work was hard. Her body ached at the end of each shift, but there was dignity in it, in making sure the rooms were clean, in ensuring that patients recovering from surgery didn't face infection from preventable contamination, in wiping down the railings that frightened family members gripped as they walked to see their loved ones. Grace moved through room 412, now her movements practiced and efficient. Empty the trash, wipe down surfaces, check the bathroom supplies, refill the water pitcher. Small tasks that added up to something larger. Care, attention, the quiet work of making someone's difficult day slightly more bearable. The room was currently empty, awaiting its next occupant. Grace paused by the window looking out at the Boston skyline just beginning to brighten with approaching dawn. Somewhere out there, David was probably getting ready for work. He was 33 now, a software engineer, successful by most measures. But there was a distance between them that Grace couldn't seem to bridge. Her hand moved unconsciously to her chest, feeling for the medallion beneath her uniform. It was always there, resting against her heart. The medallion had come into her life 10 years ago. Another morning shift, another early arrival when the hospital was still wrapped in the gauze of night. Grace had been assigned to the pediatric oncology ward that day, a temporary reassignment while their regular cleaning staff was out sick. Room 318. Grace could still picture it perfectly. The walls had been painted with murals of cartoon characters, someone's well-meaning attempt to make the space less frightening for children. But no amount of bright colors could mask what that ward really was, a place where children fought battles that would break most adults. Emily Rose Bennett, 7 years old, leukemia. The chart on the door had listed her condition in cold medical terms, but it hadn't prepared Grace for the little girl inside. Emily had been alone when Grace entered, not asleep despite the early hour. She sat propped up in bed, her head completely bald from chemotherapy, her skin the color of old paper. But her eyes were bright and alert and filled with something Grace hadn't expected to see. Peace. "Hello," Emily had said, her voice small but clear. "Are you here to clean?" Grace had nodded, suddenly finding it difficult to speak. Something about this child reached into her chest and squeezed. "That's good." The last lady missed the corner by the window. "There's dust there, it makes me sneeze." Grace had smiled despite the ache in her throat. "I'll make sure to get that corner extra clean." She had worked slowly that morning, taking more time than necessary. Emily had watched her with curious eyes, asking questions. Where did Grace live? Did she have children? What was her favorite color? Grace had answered honestly, finding herself opening up to this little girl in ways she rarely did with anyone. Something about Emily invited confidence, made Grace feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced since Bobby died. "I don't have much longer," Emily had said suddenly, matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. "The doctors told my mom and dad. They didn't tell me, but I heard them talking in the hallway." Grace's hands had stilled on her cleaning cloth. "Emily." "It's okay," the little girl had interrupted. "I'm not scared. I know what comes next is better than this." She gestured to the machines the IV lined the hospital prison that had become her world. "But I am sad about one thing." "What's that, sweetheart?" "Nobody comes to visit anymore. My mom and dad, they were here every day at first, but then my dad got scared. He started drinking. My mom had to choose between staying with him or staying with me. She chose him." Emily's voice didn't hold bitterness, just sad acceptance. "I understand. Watching someone die is really hard." Grace had set down her supplies and moved to the bedside. Professional boundaries be damned. She had taken Emily's small hand in hers. "You're not alone. I'm here. Will you come back tomorrow? Every day, I promise." And she had. For 6 months, Grace had requested assignment to the pediatric ward specifically so she could see Emily. She would arrive early before her shift officially started and spend 30 minutes with the little girl, reading to her, talking with her, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. Grace had used her lunch breaks to research Emily's condition, to learn what she could do to make the child more comfortable. She had spent her own money on small gifts, books, a soft blanket when Emily complained of being cold, special lotion when the hospital soap made her skin itch. The other nurses had noticed. Some had frowned, muttering about inappropriate boundaries. But Grace's supervisor, a woman named Margaret O'Brien with 30 years of nursing experience, had taken Grace aside one day. "What you're doing for that child, don't stop. Some people in this world are meant to be healers even if they don't have the medical degree to prove it. You've got the gift, Grace. Don't let anyone tell you different." Emily had grown weaker as winter turned to spring. The cancer was aggressive. The treatments that had given other children years gave Emily only months. But she never lost that strange peace. That acceptance that seemed beyond her years. One April morning, Grace had arrived to find Emily barely conscious. The child's breathing was shallow. Her small body seemed to have shrunk even further into the hospital bed. But when Grace took her hand, Emily's eyes fluttered open. "Grace," she whispered, "I'm here, honey. I'm right here. I want to give you something." Emily's other hand moved slowly, reaching for something on the bedside table. A small silver medallion on a delicate chain. "My grandma gave this to me. She said it was magic, that it would protect me and help me do important things." Grace's vision blurred with tears. "Emily, you should keep it." "No," the little girl's voice was weak but insistent. "It didn't protect me. But I think maybe it wasn't meant for that. I think it was meant for you." "Sweetheart, you're going to save people, Grace. Lots of people. People the doctors can't save. People who need someone to believe in them when they can't believe in themselves." Emily pressed the medallion into Grace's palm, her small fingers cold. "Promise me you'll use it. Promise me you'll help them." "I promise." Emily had smiled then, a beautiful, radiant smile that seemed to light up the dim room. "Good, now I can go. I'm so tired, Grace." "Rest, baby. It's okay to rest." "Will you stay? I don't want to be alone." "I'm not going anywhere." Emily had died 20 minutes later. Peaceful, quiet, her small hands still in Grace's as the morning sun broke through the clouds outside and filled the room with golden light. Grace had kept the promise. Over the next 10 years, she had used every skill she possessed to help patients who fell through the cracks of the medical system. Not openly, not in ways that would get her fired or bring attention, but quietly, consistently. 6 times before today, she had identified patients who were slipping away despite the best efforts of their doctors. Evelyn Harper, 72 years old, stroke victim. The neurologist had said there was too much damage, that she would never regain consciousness. Grace had spent 3 months coming in on her days off talking to Evelyn, playing the music that Evelyn's daughter said she loved, massaging her hands and feet to prevent muscle atrophy. Evelyn had woken up on a Tuesday morning. The doctors called it unprecedented. Grace called it a promise kept. Marcus Green, 42, car accident, paralyzed from the waist down. The physical therapists had given up, said he would never walk again. Grace had researched experimental treatments, had used $400 of her savings to pay for a specialist consultation the insurance wouldn't cover. Marcus had taken his first steps 6 months later. Theodore Bennett, 9 years old, Emily's younger brother, bone cancer. When Grace had learned that Emily's family had another child fighting the same disease, she had felt the medallion grow warm against her chest. A sign. Theodore's parents were the same people who had abandoned Emily, and they were on the verge of doing it again. Grace had intervened in ways she couldn't fully explain. Coordinating care, ensuring Theodore never spent a night alone, finding a support group for the parents that helped them cope with their fear. Theodore was 14 now, healthy, thriving. Claire Donovan, 28, heart failure. Grace had spent her entire savings, $2,800, on an experimental medication from Canada when the insurance company denied coverage. Claire had recovered, had gone on to marry and have 2 children. Each time Grace had sacrificed something. Money, time, sleep, pieces of herself that she could never get back. But each time the medallion seemed to pulse with warmth against her skin, and Grace would think of Emily's words. "You're going to save people, Grace." The cost had been high. David had needed a loan for a down payment on a house. Grace hadn't had the money to help. His marriage had struggled. His wife, Jennifer, had grown resentful of the financial pressure of David's inability to provide in the way she needed. They had separated 2 months ago. David blamed Grace, though he had never said so directly. "You give everything to strangers," he had said during their last argument. "What about your family? What about me?" Grace had no answer that would satisfy him. How could she explain the weight of a promise made to a dying child? How could she make him understand that saving these people wasn't a choice? It was a calling. The distance between them had grown. Phone calls became less frequent. Visits stopped altogether. Grace ate her meals alone in her small apartment. The place was sparse now. She had sold most of her furniture over the years, converting everything that could be converted into funds for her mission. Some nights Grace wondered if David was right, if she had lost herself in this work, if she was using these strangers to avoid dealing with her own grief, her own loneliness. But then she would touch the medallion and remember Emily's face. Remember Bobby's last words. Don't stop living. This was how she lived. This was her light. The sound of voices in the hallway pulled Grace back to the present. She finished her work in room 412 and pushed her cart out into the corridor. Morning shift change was beginning. Nurses arriving, doctors making their rounds. The hospital stirring to full life. Grace made her way to the staff room, clocking in officially now that 6 a.m. had arrived. Her supervisor, a stern woman named Patricia Hewitt, looked up from her paperwork. Grace, we've got a situation. New patient coming into 412. Priority case. I need that room absolutely spotless. Not just your regular clean, deep clean, everything. Of course. What's the case? Patricia's expression softened slightly. Hell's Angel. Came in last night. 55 years old, covered in tattoos, looks like he could bench press a truck. But he's dying, Grace. 20 different specialists have looked at him. Nobody knows what's wrong. His daughter is falling apart. They're giving him 48 hours, maybe less. Something shifted in Grace's chest. A familiar pull. The medallion seemed to warm against her skin. I'll take care of it, Grace said quietly. She spent the next 3 hours on room 412, not just cleaning, but preparing. She knew what was coming, recognized the signs. This was patient number 7. Another promise to keep, another light to guard until it could burn on its own again. Grace wiped down every surface twice, changed the curtains, ensured the bathroom was immaculate. She brought in fresh flowers from the hospital garden, arranging them on the windowsill, where morning light would catch them. Small touches that most people wouldn't notice, but that made a difference in how a space felt. At 11 a.m., the transport team arrived. Grace stepped back, making herself invisible, as they always did when staff moved through her space. But she watched. The man on the gurney was massive. Even diminished by illness, his frame spoke of power. Tattoos covered both arms, disappearing under the hospital gown. His face was weathered and lined a thick gray beard, obscuring much of his lower face. But his eyes. As the gurney passed, his eyes flickered open briefly and met Grace's. In that moment, Grace saw everything. Pain, fear, regret, a lifetime of choices that had led to this hospital bed. A man who had built walls around himself so high that he couldn't see over them anymore. A man who was dying, not just in body, but in spirit. The medallion seemed to pulse gently against Grace's chest. Behind the gurney walked a woman in her early 30s. Expensive suit, dark circles under her eyes. Hair that had been professionally styled but was now falling out of its arrangement. She moved like someone running on fumes. Her face was a mask of professional composure cracking at the edges. The daughter. She had to be the daughter. The team settled the patient into room 412. Grace waited in the hallway cart, ready for the signal that she could enter to do any final preparations. Through the window, she watched the doctors brief the daughter, watched the woman's shoulders tighten with each word, watched her nod, mechanically processing information that her heart couldn't accept. 48 hours. Dr. Leonard Reynolds emerged first. Grace had worked with Dr. Reynolds for 10 years. He was a good doctor, kind, thorough, but he looked defeated now. Grace, he said, noticing her. I don't know what we're going to do for this one. Jack Mercer. Every test comes back normal, but he's shutting down anyway. It's like his body just decided to quit. Grace nodded, filing away the name. Jack Mercer. His daughter Rachel is an attorney. She's already talking about flying in specialists from Johns Hopkins. But Grace, I don't think time is on our side here. I'll make sure the room is comfortable for the family, Grace said. You do that. You are good at that. Dr. Reynolds patted her shoulder absently before walking away, already focused on the next crisis. Grace entered room 412 with her supplies. The daughter Rachel stood by the window, arms crossed, staring out at nothing. She didn't acknowledge Grace's presence. Jack Mercer lay in the bed, eyes closed, breathing shallow. The machines around him beeped steadily, but with an underlying irregularity that Grace had learned to recognize. A heart struggling to maintain its rhythm. Grace worked quietly. She had learned long ago how to move through a space without disturbing its occupants, how to be present without demanding attention. They don't know what's wrong with him, Rachel said suddenly. Her voice was sharp, controlled, the voice of someone who solved problems for a living and was confronting a problem that had no solution. 20 doctors, 20 different specialists, and not one of them can tell me why my father is dying. Grace paused in her work. I'm sorry. Are you? Rachel turned, finally looking at her. That's what everyone says. I'm sorry. As if sorry changes anything. As if sorry keeps my father alive. Grace met her gaze steadily. She had learned not to flinch from anger. It was rarely about her. You're right, Grace said simply. Sorry doesn't change anything, but sometimes it's all we have to offer. Rachel's mask cracked slightly. Tears welled in her eyes before she blinked them back. I don't even know why I'm here. We haven't spoken in 6 months. Before that, maybe twice a year. He was never a father to me, not really. But now, she looked at the man in the bed. Now I can't imagine a world without him in it, even if he's not in my life, knowing he exists somewhere. Does that make sense? Yes, Grace said. It makes perfect sense. Rachel wiped her eyes quickly, rebuilding her composure. I need to make some calls. Try to reach the specialist at Johns Hopkins, will you? Can you stay with him? I don't want him to be alone. Of course. Rachel grabbed her phone and briefcase, moving toward the door with the determined stride of someone who believed action could solve anything. Grace watched her go, recognizing herself 15 years ago. The desperation to do something, anything, when faced with the unbearable. Alone with Jack Mercer, Grace set down her cleaning supplies. She moved to the bedside, studying the man more carefully now. Up close, she could see the details the tattoos revealed. A motorcycle club emblem on his left forearm. Names inscribed on his right. Margaret. The name had been altered at some point, another name covered beneath it. Dates beneath the name. Birth and death dates. Grace's hand moved to the medallion, pulling it out from beneath her uniform. The silver caught the afternoon light streaming through the window. I don't know if you can hear me, Grace said quietly. Most people in your condition can. The hearing is the last thing to go, they say. So I'm going to assume you were listening. She pulled a chair close to the bed, settling into it with a soft exhale. Her knees ached. They always did by midday. My name is Grace Callahan. I'm going to tell you a story about a little girl named Emily, about a promise I made, and about why I think you're going to be okay even though 20 doctors disagree with me. Grace began to talk. She told Jack Mercer about Bobby, about how love could be strong enough to survive death, about Emily and the medallion, about the 6 others she had helped guide back from the edge. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. Jack's breathing didn't change. But Grace continued talking, her voice low and soothing, filling the room with sound that felt like presence, like care. She talked until her shift ended. Then she clocked out, changed out of her uniform, and came back. She sat with Jack through the evening, through the night. Rachel returned at some point, saw Grace there, and said nothing. Just took a seat on the other side of the bed. At 3 in the morning, Grace finally stood. Her body protested, every joint stiff, every muscle sore, but there was something she needed to do. She left the hospital, drove to her small apartment, and gathered the last of her savings from the envelope she kept in her nightstand. $2,800. It had taken her 2 years to save it. She had been planning to use it to pay down some of Bobby's medical debt that still haunted her credit. Instead, she drove to the 24-hour pharmacy downtown, the same pharmacy where she had purchased the Canadian medication for Claire Donovan. The pharmacist recognized her. Grace, what brings you in at this hour? I need your help, Marcus. She used his name deliberately. Marcus Green, the paralyzed man who now walked, who had retrained as a pharmacist after his recovery, who had never forgotten the woman who had refused to give up on him. Grace explained what she knew about Jack's condition, the symptoms, the test results, the lack of diagnosis. Marcus listened intently, his face growing thoughtful. There's something experimental, not approved in the US yet, but it's shown promise for cases like this. Autoimmune conditions that present without clear markers. The thing is, how much? $2,000, and I'll need a doctor to sign off on it. I'll get the signature. Grace counted out the money, every bill representing hours of work, sacrifices made. Can you have it ready by morning? For you, yes. Grace drove back to Sacred Heart. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. She made her way to Dr. Reynolds' office. He arrived at 6:30, surprised to find her waiting. Grace, what's wrong? She told him about the medication, about Marcus, about what she wanted to try, Dr. Reynolds listened, his expression shifting from surprise to concern to something that might have been hope. This is highly irregular. I know. If it doesn't work, if something goes wrong, it'll be on me, not you, not the hospital. Dr. Reynolds studied her for a long moment. You've done this before, haven't you? I've seen the pattern. Patients who should die don't. Patients who should stay broken heal. And you're always there, just at the edge of the picture. Grace said nothing. Evelyn Harper wrote a letter to the hospital administration about you. Did you know that she wanted to endow a scholarship in your name? We had to decline because you're not medical staff. But I kept the letter. She said you were an angel. Dr. Reynolds pulled out his prescription pad. I don't know what you are, Grace Callahan, but I know 20 specialists have failed. So what's one more try? He signed the prescription. Grace took it with hands that trembled slightly. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. And Grace, whatever you're sacrificing for this, I hope you know it matters. Grace returned to the pharmacy. Marcus had the medication ready. She signed the papers, handed over the last of her money, and drove back to the hospital with the small package secured carefully in her purse. Room 412 was quiet when she entered. Rachel had fallen asleep in the chair, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle. Jack's breathing had grown more labored. The machines showed deteriorating vitals. Grace spoke quietly with the nurse on duty, showing her the prescription. The nurse raised her eyebrows but said nothing. She prepared the IV line for the new medication. Grace returned to Jack's bedside. She pulled out the medallion, holding it in her palm. Emily, she whispered, this is number 7. Help me keep my promise. She stayed through the morning, through Rachel waking with a start disoriented, through the doctor's rounds and the nurse's checks, through the subtle changes that began to show in Jack's vitals. At noon, his eyes opened. Rachel gasped. Dad, Jack's gaze was unfocused at first. Then it sharpened. He looked at Rachel, then at Grace. His voice, when it came, was rough from disuse. Who are you? Grace smiled softly. My name is Grace. I'm just the cleaning lady. But as she said it, she touched the medallion hidden beneath her uniform. And for just a moment, she could have sworn she felt Emily's small hand in hers again. Could have sworn she heard that sweet voice. 7, Grace. You saved 7. Keep going. The machines continued their steady beeping. But the rhythm had changed. Stronger, more regular. The sound of a body deciding against all odds to fight. Grace gathered her supplies and moved toward the door. She had other rooms to clean, other patients to tend, but she would be back. She always came back. In the doorway, she paused and looked back. Rachel was crying, holding her father's hand. Jack was still disoriented, still weak, but alive, present, given a chance he hadn't had 48 hours ago. Don't stop living, Bobby had said. This is how I live, Grace thought. This is my light. She pushed her cart into the hallway, the squeaking wheel announcing her presence. An invisible woman doing visible work, a cleaning lady who cleaned more than floors. The medallion rested against her heart, warm and steady, a promise kept. But Grace knew, in the way she had learned to know these things, that the hardest part was yet to come. Saving a life was one thing. Teaching someone how to live it was something else entirely. And she could feel already in the ache of her bones and the weight of her exhaustion that this salvation was going to cost her more than money. It was going to cost her everything. The morning light filtered through the Venetian blinds of Grace's apartment, casting stripes across the nearly empty living room. She sat on the floor, her back against the wall, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The apartment was silent except for the distant hum of traffic from the street below. Grace had lived here for 12 years. After selling the house she and Bobby had shared, after paying down the medical debt, this small one-bedroom had been all she could afford. It had been enough then. It was more than enough now. The furniture had disappeared gradually over the years. First, the dining table sold to help fund Marcus Green's specialist consultation. Then the couch converted to cash for Claire Donovan's medication. The television, the bookshelf, the decorative pieces that had once made the space feel like home. Now there was a mattress on the floor in the bedroom, a single chair at the kitchen counter. And these walls, these empty walls that echoed when she spoke aloud, which she rarely did anymore. Grace's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. David, her son, the call she had been dreading. Hello, Mom. David's voice was tight, controlled. I got a notification from the bank. The joint account we set up. The emergency fund? Grace closed her eyes. She knew where this was going. It's empty, Mom. $2,800. Gone. That was supposed to be for emergencies. For both of us. Jennifer and I. We were going to use it to pay the lawyer fees for the divorce mediation. I'm sorry. Sorry. David's control cracked. That's it. That's all you have to say. Do you have any idea what Jennifer said when I told her the money was gone? Do you want to know what she called you? Grace said nothing. What defense could she offer? She had taken money that didn't belong entirely to her, had used it to save a stranger's life. In David's world, in the world of practical necessities and legal obligations, what she had done was indefensible. Who was it this time? David continued. What dying stranger was more important than your own family? A man named Jack Mercer. He was dying. 20 doctors couldn't help him. The experimental medication. It was the only chance he had. And you're a cleaning lady, Mom. You mop floors, you empty trash cans. You're not a doctor, you're not a miracle worker. You're just someone who can't let go. The words landed like physical blows. Grace absorbed them, feeling each one find its mark. You're right, she said quietly. What? You're right, I'm just a cleaning Martin. David was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted. Less anger, more pain. Why do you do this? Why do you give everything to people you don't even know? Dad's been gone for 15 years. It's time to stop trying to save him. Grace's hand moved to the medallion. I'm not trying to save your father. Then what? What are you trying to do? Oh, I'm trying to keep a promise. To who? To someone who believed I could make a difference. David laughed, but it was a bitter sound. Well, congratulations. You've made a difference. Jennifer's lawyer is going to crucify me in mediation because I can't come up with my share of the fees. I'll probably have to sell the condo, start over, all because my mother can't stop playing hero. David, just don't. She heard him take a shaky breath. I can't do this anymore, Mom. I can't keep watching you destroy yourself, and I can't let you destroy me too. What are you saying? I'm saying I need space. Real space. Don't call me. Don't text me. I need to figure out my life without worrying about what you're going to sacrifice next. The line went dead. Grace sat with the phone in her hands, staring at the empty room. The silence pressed in from all sides. David's words echoed in the hollow space. You're just someone who can't let go. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was trying to save Bobby over and over again, trying to rewrite the ending where she had enough money for the treatments, where the medical system didn't fail them, where love was enough to keep someone alive. Or maybe she was just trying to prove to herself that her life still had purpose, that a cleaning lady could matter in ways that transcended the visible work of her hands. Grace stood slowly, her knees protesting. She was 58 years old, but she felt ancient. The weight of the years of the sacrifices of the secret work she had done pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. She had 3 hours before her shift started. She used one of them to shower, one to eat a meal of crackers and cheese, all that remained in her mostly empty refrigerator, and one to sit in silence holding the medallion, trying to hear Emily's voice through the doubt. You're going to save people, Grace. But at what cost? Sacred Heart Hospital bustled with its usual morning energy when Grace arrived. She clocked in, gathered her supplies, and began her rounds. Room 412 was no longer her responsibility. Jack Mercer had been moved to a recovery ward 2 days after receiving the experimental medication. His improvement had been dramatic enough that Dr. Reynolds had written a paper on the case, calling it a medical anomaly worthy of further study. Grace had kept her distance. That was how it always worked. She saved them, then she faded back into invisibility. It was safer that way, less complicated. She wasn't looking for gratitude or recognition. She was keeping a promise. But Jack Mercer, it seemed, didn't understand how this was supposed to work. Grace was mopping the hallway outside the recovery ward when she heard heavy footsteps behind her. She turned to find Jack, standing there still wearing his hospital gown, an IV pole beside him. He looked better. Color had returned to his face. His eyes were clear. You're Grace Callahan, he said. Not a question. A statement. I am. The cleaning lady. Yes. Jack studied her with an intensity that made Grace uncomfortable. The nurses say you were in my room before I woke up. They say you stayed overnight, multiple nights. I was doing my job. Cleaning ladies don't stay overnight with dying patients. Grace resumed mopping, moving past him. I should get back to work. Wait. Jack's hand shot out, not touching her, but blocking her path. Please, I need to understand. Dr. Reynolds won't tell me much. Patient privacy, he says. But I know, I can feel it. You did something. You're the reason I'm still here. Grace met his gaze. She saw genuine confusion there. And something else. The beginning of understanding. Of recognizing that he had been given something he didn't deserve and couldn't repay. You should focus on getting better, Grace said. You have a daughter who needs you. Rachel. Jack's expression softened at the name. She's been here every day. We've talked more in the past week than we have in the past 5 years. She told me you were there. That first night, she said she felt like you were guarding me, like you wouldn't let death take me. Your daughter has an active imagination. Does she? Jack leaned against the wall, clearly still weak. 6 people have come to visit me. Strangers. People I've never met. They all have the same story. They were dying. The doctors gave up. And then you appeared. And they lived. Grace's hands tightened on the mop handle. I don't know what you're talking about. Evelyn Harper. She had a stroke 3 years ago. Vegetative state. You spent 3 months with her. She woke up. Marcus Green. Paralyzed. You found him a specialist. He walks now. Theodore Bennett. 9 years old. Bone cancer. You coordinated his entire treatment plan. He's in high school now, healthy. Jack's voice grew softer. Claire Donovan. Heart failure. You bought her medication with your own money. She has 2 kids now. Did you know that she named her daughter Grace? Grace felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back. Those people recovered because of their doctors, because of medical intervention. No, Jack shook his head. They recovered because someone believed in them when everyone else had stopped, because someone sacrificed for them, someone who didn't even know them. He paused. Why did you do it? Why did you spend your last $2,800 on a stranger? How did you know about that? Marcus Green is a chatty pharmacist, and I'm very good at asking questions. Grace looked at this man, this former Hell's Angel covered in tattoos, who looked at her like she was a puzzle he was determined to solve. I made a promise to someone a long time ago. That's all. To who? A little girl who deserved better than the world gave her. Jack nodded slowly as if this made perfect sense. I'm going to pay you back, the $2,800, and whatever else you spent on me. I don't want your money, Pama. I know you don't, but I'm giving it anyway. Jack straightened, pushing off from the wall. And I'm going to do something else. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you did. These people you saved. We're going to tell your story. No. Grace's voice was sharp. You absolutely will not. Why? Because that's not why I do this. I don't do it for recognition. I do it because it's what I'm supposed to do. It's my purpose. If you turn it into some media story, some feel-good hospital tale, you'll ruin everything. Jack studied her for a long moment. You're afraid. Of what? Of being seen. You've spent so long being invisible that you don't know how to exist any other way. Grace said nothing. The observation was too accurate, too close to truth she barely admitted to herself. I'll respect your wishes, Jack said finally, for now, but Grace, you can't keep doing this. You can't keep burning yourself up for other people. Eventually there won't be anything left. He walked away back toward his room, leaving Grace alone in the hallway with her mop and her secrets. The days passed. Grace continued her work, but something had shifted. The invisibility she had cultivated so carefully was beginning to crack. The 6 people Jack had mentioned started appearing at the hospital. Not together, but one by one, finding reasons to visit, to talk to her. Evelyn Harper brought her homemade cookies. Just wanted to thank you properly, she said, and to let you know my grandson is starting medical school. Because of you, because you showed us that healing isn't always about medical degrees. Marcus Green caught her during her lunch break. I talked to Jack Mercer, told him about what you did. Grace, you saved my life twice. once when I was paralyzed, and again when you believed I could become something more than a patient. I'm a pharmacist now because of you." Theodore Bennett's mother found her in the cafeteria. "Theo wants to meet you. He remembers you from when he was 9. He said you were the only person who talked to him like he was going to live. Can we arrange a visit?" Claire Donovan sent a letter care of the hospital. Inside was a photograph of her 2 children. On the back she had written, "This is Grace, named after the woman who gave me the chance to be a mother. Thank you will never be enough. But thank you." Each interaction, each expression of gratitude felt like a weight added to Grace's shoulders rather than lifted from them. She didn't want thanks. She wanted purpose. But purpose, she was learning, came with a price she hadn't fully calculated. 2 weeks after Jack Mercer's recovery, Grace was called to Patricia Hewitt's office. Her supervisor sat behind a desk covered in paperwork, her expression grim. "Sit down, Grace." Grace sat, her hands folded in her lap. She knew what was coming, had known it would come eventually. "I've received multiple complaints," Patricia began, "from nursing staff, from administration, about you overstepping your boundaries as cleaning staff, specifically spending time with patients outside your duties, being in rooms when you should be elsewhere, having inappropriate conversations about medical conditions. I understand. Do you?" Patricia leaned forward. "Grace, I've defended you for years. You're an excellent employee, reliable, thorough, but this has gone too far. There are protocols, boundaries. You're not a doctor. You're not a nurse. You're cleaning staff." "I know what I am." "Then why can't you act like it?" Patricia's voice held frustration. "What you're doing, it's not just about breaking rules. It's about liability. If something goes wrong, if a patient is harmed because you've interfered with their care, the hospital could be sued. I could lose my job. You could lose yours." Grace met her supervisor's gaze. "Have any of my patients been harmed? That's not the point. Isn't it? You said yourself I've worked here for 15 years. Have I ever caused harm? Ever made a patient's condition worse? Ever interfered with actual medical treatment?" Patricia was silent. "I stay late because I care. I talk to patients because many of them have no one else. I pray with them if they want prayer. I listen if they need listening. I research conditions on my own time so I can better understand what they're going through. None of that is in my job description. But none of it is harmful either. The board doesn't see it that way. They see a liability, a lawsuit waiting to happen." Patricia pulled out a formal letter. "I'm sorry, Grace. I really am. But this is a written warning. One more complaint, one more incident of you overstepping, and you'll be terminated. No exceptions." Grace took the letter. She read it carefully. The language was clear, specific. She was to perform her cleaning duties and nothing more. No extended conversations with patients. No presence in rooms outside her designated schedule. No involvement in any aspect of patient care beyond sanitation. "I understand," Grace said. "Do you really? Because I don't think you do." Patricia's voice softened. "Grace, I've watched you these 15 years. I've seen you give everything to this hospital, to these patients, but you can't save everyone, and you can't sacrifice yourself trying." Grace stood. "May I go back to work?" Patricia waved her away, looking defeated. Grace returned to her cart, to her supplies, to the work that defined her existence. But as she moved through the hallways, she felt the walls closing in. The letter in her pocket was a reminder that even purpose had limits. Even light could be extinguished if it burned too bright. That evening, Grace sat in her empty apartment and did something she hadn't done in 10 years. She cried. Not gentle tears, deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place she had kept locked away since Bobby died, since Emily died, since she had taken on the burden of being strong enough to save everyone else. She cried for David, who needed a mother, but got a martyr instead. She cried for the furniture she had sold, the life she had abandoned, the normal existence she had traded for purpose. She cried for Bobby, who had asked her not to let his death make her bitter, never imagining it would make her into this, someone who couldn't stop giving even when there was nothing left to give. The medallion lay on the floor beside her. Grace picked it up, holding it to her chest. "Emily," she whispered, "I don't know if I can keep this promise. I don't know if I have anything left." The metal was cold, no warmth, No pulse of recognition, just silver. Grace fell asleep on the floor, exhausted and alone. The next morning, she almost didn't go to work. For the first time in 15 years, Grace Callahan considered calling in sick, considered walking away from Sacred Heart Hospital and never coming back. But habit was stronger than despair. She dressed in her uniform, pinned the medallion beneath it, and drove to work. The day passed in mechanical routine. Grace cleaned rooms without seeing them, mopped floors without thinking, moved through her duties like an automaton. The warning letter sat in her locker, a constant presence in the back of her mind. She was emptying a trash can in the East Wing when she heard raised voices. One she recognized, Rachel Mercer. Grace moved toward the sound, drawn by concern despite her better judgment. Around the corner, she found Rachel facing off with a hospital administrator. Rachel's face was flushed, her professional composure completely shattered. "This is insane," Rachel was saying. "You're punishing the person who saved my father's life. Do you understand that without Grace Callahan, my father would be dead? Ms. Mercer, I understand your gratitude, but there are procedures, protocols." Ms. Callahan overstepped her role. Her role? Her role is to care about people. That's what she does. That's what this entire hospital's supposed to do. Rachel's voice broke. "You people are so worried about liability and lawsuits that you've forgotten what healing actually means." Grace stepped forward. "Rachel." Rachel turned her eyes bright with tears. "Grace, they told me about the warning, about how they're trying to stop you from helping people. It's okay. It's not okay. None of this is okay." Rachel moved toward Grace, her anger transforming into something more vulnerable. "And you saved my father. Do you understand what that means? He was dying. I was going to lose him. And you spent your own money, your own time. You gave up everything to save a man you didn't even know. I did what I had to do." "No." Rachel shook her head. "You did what no one else would do. You saw a human being who needed help, and you helped him. Without asking for anything in return, without even wanting recognition. That's not overstepping, that's heroism." The administrator cleared his throat. "Ms. Mercer, this isn't helping." "I'm an attorney," Rachel said, turning back to him, "specializing in medical malpractice. And I'm telling you right now, if you fire Grace Callahan, I will make it my personal mission to expose every failure of care, every neglected patient, every corner cut in this hospital. I will bury you in lawsuits that actually have merit." "That's a threat." "That's a promise." Rachel's voice was ice. "Grace Callahan has done more for the patients in this hospital than half your medical staff. She saved lives that your doctors gave up on, and you're going to punish her for it. Try me." The administrator's face reddened. He looked between Rachel and Grace, clearly calculating. "This conversation is over." He walked away. Rachel and Grace stood in the hallway, the tension slowly draining away. "You didn't have to do that," Grace said quietly. "Yes, I did. You saved my father. You gave me a second chance with him. I'm not going to stand by while they try to stop you from saving others." "Rachel, I appreciate it, but you don't understand. I can't keep doing this. I don't have anything left to give." Rachel's expression softened. "Grace, can we talk? Really talk?" They found an empty conference room. Rachel closed the door, ensuring privacy. They sat across from each other at the long table. "My father told me about the money," Rachel began. "The $2,800. He wants to pay you back, but you refused." "I don't want money." "I know. That's what makes this so hard to understand." Rachel leaned forward. "Grace, why do you do this? And don't tell me it's about a promise to a dying child. There's more to it than that." Grace looked at her hands. The calluses, the age spots beginning to form, hands that had held so much loss. "My husband died in this hospital," Grace said finally. 15 years ago, cancer. We couldn't afford the treatments that might have saved him. The experimental options, the specialists. We had insurance, but it wasn't enough. And I had to watch him die knowing that money could have changed the outcome. That if we had been wealthy or connected or lucky, he might have lived." Rachel said nothing, just listened. "I made choices after he died. I took this job because I needed to be near the place where I lost him. And I found that I could help people who were in the same position, people who were dying because the system was failing them, not because medicine couldn't save them. but because they didn't have the resources, the money, the advocate fighting for them. And so you became that advocate. I became whatever they needed. And for a while it felt like I was making up for Bobby, for not being able to save him. Like every person I helped was me going back in time and saving us. But it doesn't work that way, Rachel said gently. No, it doesn't. Bobby is still gone, and I'm still here, giving everything I have to people I don't know. While my own son won't speak to me, while my apartment sits empty because I've sold everything to fund these rescues, while my life has become nothing but this endless cycle of sacrifice that never feels like enough. Grace felt tears building again, but fought them back. Emily, the little girl who gave me this medallion, she said I was going to save people. And I have. 7 people are alive because of me. 7 families still have their loved ones. But Rachel, I don't know if I can keep going. I don't know if there's anything left of me to give. Rachel reached across the table, taking Grace's weathered hand in her own. Then stop, just stop. You've done enough. Have I? Yes, more than enough. More than anyone should have to do. Grace, you can't save everyone, and you can't destroy yourself trying. Grace looked at their joined hands. Rachel's were smooth, manicured, the hands of someone who worked with paper and phones. Grace's were rough, worn, the hands of someone who worked with their body. I don't know how to stop, Grace admitted. This is all I have. Without this purpose, what am I? You're Grace Callahan. You're a person who deserves to have her own life, her own peace. You're allowed to rest. The words hit Grace like a physical blow. Rest. When was the last time she had truly rested? When had she last allowed herself a day where she didn't carry the weight of someone else's survival before she could respond? Rachel's phone rang. She looked at the screen, her expression changing. It's my father. I should. Take it, Rachel answered. Grace watched her face shift from calm to concerned to frightened in the span of seconds. I'll be right there, Rachel said, ending the call. She looked at Grace. It's David, your son. He's in the emergency room. Grace stood so quickly her chair tipped backward. What happened? I don't know. My father just said David came to see him. Collapsed in the hallway. They're running tests now. They ran through the hospital corridors, Grace's heart pounding with a fear she hadn't felt since the day Bobby died. Not David. Please, not David. The emergency room was chaos. Doctors and nurses moved with urgent purpose. Grace pushed through her cleaning staff uniform, giving her access where others might have been stopped. She found David on a gurney, his face pale, his breathing labored. The machines around him beeped with the same irregular rhythm that had surrounded Jack Mercer, the same rhythm that had become all too familiar. Dr. Reynolds looked up as Grace entered. His face was grave. Grace, I'm sorry. It's the same condition, the same unexplained symptoms, and we don't know why. The world tilted. Grace gripped the side of the gurney, staring down at her son, her baby, the one person in the world she had left. No, she whispered. Not him. Please, not him. David's eyes fluttered open. Mom, I'm here. I'm right here. I'm sorry for what I said. I was angry, but I don't. I don't want you to think I don't love you. Shh, save your strength. I need you to know. I understand. I understand why you do it, why you give everything you're trying to make the world less cruel, less random. You're trying to save everyone because you couldn't save Dad. Tears streamed down Grace's face. David, you're going to be fine. I'll fix this. I'll save you. Mom, you don't have to save me. You just need to be here. That's all I wanted, for you to be here. The words were haunting echoes of conversations they'd never had, of the years Grace had spent saving strangers while her son needed her presence more than her sacrifices. Dr. Reynolds pulled Grace aside. We're running every test. We'll find out what this is. But Grace barely heard him. She stared at her son, at the machines, at the familiar pattern of a body shutting down for reasons no one could explain. And she realized with stunning clarity that this was the cost. This was what happened when you gave everything away. Eventually, the people you loved paid the price. The stress from his divorce, the financial pressure, Grace had inadvertently caused by draining their joint account the accumulated weight of watching his mother destroy herself for strangers. It had all converged, compromising David's immune system, leaving him vulnerable to the same inexplicable autoimmune cascade that had nearly killed Jack Mercer. The medallion felt heavy against her chest. She pulled it out, holding it in her palm. The silver was cold, dead. "Emily," Grace whispered, "I can't. I don't have enough. I gave it all away." Rachel stood beside her, a hand on her shoulder. Jack appeared in the doorway, his face concerned. Around them, the hospital continued its relentless rhythm. Life and death in constant negotiation. And Grace Callahan, the woman who had saved 7 strangers, stood helpless as the one person she loved most in the world slipped away. The next hours blurred into an eternity of waiting. Grace refused to leave David's side. She held his hand, whispered to him, willed her own life force into his failing body. But it wasn't enough. The test came back inconclusive. The treatments that had worked for Jack showed no effect on David. His condition continued to deteriorate. At some point during that first terrible night, Jack Mercer made a phone call. Then another, and another. By morning, room 412 had visitors. Not just Grace and Rachel, but others. 6 people who had no reason to be there except for one simple fact. Grace Callahan had saved their lives. And now it was their turn to save hers. Grace sat beside David's bed in room 412, the same room where Jack Mercer had nearly died 3 weeks ago. The irony wasn't lost on her. This room had become a battleground between life and death, and now her son was the one fighting. The night pressed against the windows, turning them into dark mirrors that reflected the scene inside. Grace's face looked hollow in the glass. She hadn't left David's side in 36 hours. Hadn't eaten. Hadn't slept. Just sat there holding his hand, willing her own life force into his body if such a thing were possible. David's breathing was shallow. The machines surrounding him told a story Grace knew too well. Deteriorating vitals, organs beginning to shut down, a body giving up for reasons that medical science couldn't explain or prevent. Dr. Reynolds had run every test twice, consulted with specialists from 3 different hospitals, tried medications that had worked on Jack Mercer. Nothing made a difference. David was slipping away, and Grace was powerless to stop it. The door opened quietly. Rachel entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. She set one beside Grace, though they both knew it would go untouched like all the others. "Jack's been calling," Rachel said softly. "He wants to come, to help. There's nothing he can do. Maybe not, but he wants to try." Rachel sat in the chair on the other side of the bed. "Grace, you can't keep doing this. You haven't eaten. You look like you're going to collapse." "I'm not leaving him. I'm not asking you to leave. I'm asking you to take care of yourself. If you collapse, who's going to be here for David?" Grace didn't respond. Self-care seemed like an absurd concept when her son was dying. Food, sleep, rest. What did any of it matter if David didn't survive? The medallion lay on the bedside table. Grace had taken it off hours ago, unable to bear the weight of it against her chest. The silver caught the fluorescent light, gleaming like an accusation. 7 strangers saved, but her own son. For him, she had nothing. "I gave it all away," Grace whispered. "Every dollar. Every ounce of strength, every moment I could have spent building a relationship with him. I gave it all to people I didn't know. And now when he needs me most, I have nothing left to give." Rachel's hand covered Grace's. "That's not true. You're here. That's what he asked for. Just for you to be here. Being here isn't enough. I need to save him. Maybe saving him isn't your job this time. Maybe your job is just to love him through whatever comes." The words felt like stones in Grace's chest. Love him through whatever comes. Even if what came was death. Even if the promise she had made to Emily, the purpose she had built her life around, meant nothing in the face of losing her own child. Grace closed her eyes at exhaustion pulling at her like an undertow. Images flashed behind her eyelids. Bobby in this same hospital dying because they didn't have enough money. Emily, small and pale, pressing the medallion into her palm. The 6 others she had saved. Jack Mercer returning from the edge of death. All of them alive because she had sacrificed everything. But David. David was dying because she had sacrificed too much. Because the stress of watching his mother pour everything into strangers had broken something inside him. Because the financial strain, The emotional distance, the accumulated weight of her choices had compromised his body's ability to fight. The night wore on. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting medications, their faces carefully neutral. Grace recognized that neutrality. It was the mask medical professionals wore when they had stopped hoping for recovery and started preparing families for loss. At 3 in the morning, David stirred. His eyes opened, unfocused at first, then finding Grace's face. "Mom," he whispered. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." Thirsty, Grace helped him take small sips of water through a straw. His hands trembled with the effort. When had her strong, capable son become this fragile? "Mom, I need to tell you something." "Save your strength." "No, listen." David's grip on her hand tightened with surprising force. "I was wrong, what I said about you, about the sacrifices. I was angry because I wanted you to choose me, to choose our family. But now I understand." "David, please. You did choose us. You chose to show me what love looks like. Real love. The kind that gives everything without counting them on, the kind that sees someone suffering and can't walk away." His breathing was labored, each word an effort. "I was jealous. Jealous of the strangers who got your care, your attention. But Mom, they needed you. I was just too selfish to see it." Tears streamed down Grace's face. "You're not selfish. You had every right to want a mother who was present, who put you first. You were present in the ways that mattered. You taught me. You taught me that life isn't about what we keep for ourselves. It's about what we give away. That's the lesson, isn't it? That's what Dad wanted you to learn when he told you not to stop living." Grace couldn't speak. Her throat was closed with grief and love and regret. "If I don't make it," David continued, "don't say that. If I don't make it, I need you to promise me something. Don't stop. Don't stop saving people. Don't let my death be the thing that makes you bitter. Be the light, Mom, the way you've always been." "I can't. I don't have anything left." "Yes, you do. You have everything that matters. You have love, and that's the only thing that's ever saved anyone." David's eyes closed. His hand went limp in Grace's grasp. For one terrible moment, she thought he was gone. But the machines continued their steady beeping. He had simply fallen back into exhausted sleep. Grace sat frozen, her son's words echoing in her mind. Be the light. But how could she be light when she felt so consumed by darkness? The door opened again. This time it wasn't Rachel. Jack Mercer stood in the doorway looking uncertain. Behind him, Grace could see other figures in the hallway. Evelyn Harper, Marcus Green, Theodore Bennett, no longer a child but a teenager. Claire Donovan. Others she didn't immediately recognize. "Grace," Jack said softly, "may we come in?" She wanted to say no, wanted to tell them all to leave, to let her grieve in private. But something in Jack's expression stopped her. He wasn't here out of obligation. He was here because he understood something she had forgotten. Grace nodded. They filed in quietly, filling the small room with their presence. 7 people, the 7 she had saved. They formed a circle around David's bed, and Grace realized with a start that this was what she had done for each of them. Created a circle of care around their suffering, refused to let them face death alone. Now they were doing the same for her. "We heard about David," Evelyn Harper said, her elderly voice steady and strong. "We came as soon as we could." "There's nothing you can do," Grace said. "Maybe not," Jack replied, "but you did something for each of us. You stayed, you believed, you fought when we couldn't fight for ourselves. Now it's our turn." Marcus Green moved forward, his pharmacist training evident in how he studied David's chart. "The symptoms are identical to what Jack had, and what I understand from the others. This condition, whatever it is, it responds to care, to presence, to someone refusing to give up." "I've tried everything," Grace said. "I have no money left, no resources, nothing." "You have us," Claire Donovan said simply. She held up a small bag. "I brought the medication you bought me, the experimental treatment from Canada. Marcus says it might help. We're donating it back to you." Evelyn Harper placed an envelope on the bedside table. "That's $5,000. From all of us. We took up a collection. It's not much, but it's a start." Theodore Bennett, lanky and awkward at 14, stepped forward. "My mom wanted to come, but she's working. She said to tell you that you saved our family twice. Once when you saved me, and again when you taught her how to be a mother. She said, whatever you need, we'll find a way. Grace stared at them, these people she had saved now circling around to save her. The symmetry of it was almost unbearable. I don't deserve this, she whispered. Neither did we, Jack said. But you gave it to us anyway. That's how grace works. It's not about deserving. It's about giving because it's the right thing to do. Rachel appeared in the doorway, her phone in hand. I just spoke with a specialist at Johns Hopkins. She's willing to consult remotely. No charge. She said any friend of Grace Callahan's is someone worth saving. The pieces were coming together. The circle of care expanding. Grace felt something shift inside her chest like ice beginning to thaw. She had spent 15 years giving everything away, never imagining that love could be returned, that the seeds she had planted could grow into something that would sustain her in her darkest hour. Dr. Reynolds entered looking surprised at the crowd. What's going on here? We're saving someone's life, Jack said simply, the way Grace taught us. By showing up, by refusing to quit, by believing that love is stronger than death. Dr. Reynolds looked at Grace. Something passed between them. An understanding. He had watched her work miracles through sheer determination and sacrifice. Now he was witnessing the harvest of those miracles. All right, he said, let's see what we can do. The next 72 hours blurred together. The 7 people Grace had saved took shifts at David's bedside, ensuring he was never alone. They brought food for Grace, forcing her to eat. They researched treatments, comparing David's case to their own experiences. They prayed those who believed in prayer. They simply sat in silence those who didn't. Jack Mercer proved surprisingly adept at navigating hospital bureaucracy. His intimidating presence convinced administrators to bend rules about visiting hours and patient advocates. Rachel used her legal expertise to ensure David received every possible treatment. Insurance denials be damned. Marcus Green collaborated with Dr. Reynolds, creating a treatment protocol that combined elements from all 7 previous cases. The experimental medication from Canada, specialized physical therapy techniques used on Marcus, nutritional supplements that had helped Evelyn, a holistic approach that traditional medicine might have dismissed, but that had proven effective in defying medical expectations. Grace watched it all happen with a mixture of awe and disbelief. For 15 years, she had been the giver. The one who sacrificed. The one who showed up when no one else would. She had never imagined herself on the receiving end, had never allowed herself to need others the way they had needed her. But here she was, helpless, dependent, surrounded by people who refused to let her face this alone. On the 3rd night, as Grace dozed fitfully in her chair, she felt someone take her hand. She opened her eyes to find Jack sitting beside her. How do you do this? She asked. How do you sit with someone else's suffering and not be crushed by it? You showed me, Jack said. That first night I was here when I was dying, I could feel your presence. It was like you were standing between me and death. Not because you had some magic power, but because you cared enough to fight. That's what we're doing for you now, for David. We're fighting because we care. I'm so tired, Jack. I don't know if I have the strength to keep fighting. Then let us fight for you. That's what family does. You're not my family. Aren't we? Jack's grip on her hand tightened. Family isn't just blood. It's the people who show up, who stay, who refuse to let you face the darkness alone. You created a family when you saved us, whether you meant to or not, and families take care of each other. Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks. She had been alone for so long. Even when Bobby was alive, even when David was young and needed her, there had been a loneliness in her sacrifice, a sense that she was the only one who truly understood what it meant to give everything. But she wasn't alone anymore. On the 4th day, David's eyes opened with clarity they hadn't held since his collapse. The machines showed steady vitals. His breathing was stronger. When Dr. Reynolds ran his tests, the results showed marked improvement. It's working, Dr. Reynolds said, barely concealing his surprise. Whatever combination of treatments we're using, his body is responding. Grace leaned over her son, touching his face. David. Hey, Mom. His voice was weak but present, alive. You're going to be okay. I know, you're here. All of you. David's gaze moved around the room, taking in the circle of faces. Who are these people? Their family, Grace said, and as she spoke the words, she realized they were true. Recovery was slow. David spent 2 weeks in the hospital, gradually regaining his strength. The seven who had been saved visited regularly, bringing books, conversation, and the simple gift of presence. Grace watched her son connect with these strangers who weren't strangers anymore, watched him understand, in a way words could never convey, why she had done what she did. Rachel and Jack developed an unlikely friendship, bonding over their shared experience of nearly losing their fathers. They talked about second chances, about the courage it took to forgive, about building relationships after years of distance and pain. Grace herself began to heal, not just from the exhaustion and despair that had brought her so low, but from 15 years of carrying burdens alone. She started accepting help, started admitting when she needed support, started understanding that being strong didn't mean refusing to be vulnerable. The hospital administration, faced with the collective advocacy of 8 families Grace had saved, quietly withdrew their warning. Patricia Hewitt called Grace into her office one afternoon 3 weeks after David's collapse. "The board has approved a new position," Patricia said. "Patient advocate, full-time, benefits, a salary that actually reflects the work you do. They want you to take it." Grace stared at the job description. It was everything she had been doing unofficially for 15 years, now recognized and supported. "I don't have a degree in social work," Grace said. "I'm not qualified. You're the most qualified person I know. You've been doing this job without pay, without recognition, without any support from the institution. Now we want to do it right. Will you accept?" Grace thought about Emily, about the promise she had made, about the 7 people she had saved and the 1 person they had saved in return, about David recovering in his hospital room, learning what it meant to be part of something larger than himself. "Yes," Grace said, "I'll accept." 6 months later, Grace stood in room 412 once again. But this time she wore different clothes, not a cleaning staff uniform, but the professional attire of a hospital employee with an office and a title. Patient advocate. The room had a new occupant. Lillian Ward, 45 years old, recently widowed, suffering from an autoimmune condition that had left her bedridden and hopeless. The doctors were running tests but held little optimism. Grace pulled a chair to Lillian's bedside. The woman's eyes were closed, her face turned toward the wall, the posture of someone who had given up. "Mrs. Ward," Grace said softly, "my name is Grace Callahan. I'm the patient advocate here at Sacred Heart. I'd like to talk with you if that's all right." "I don't need an advocate. I need a miracle." Grace smiled. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the silver medallion. It gleamed in the afternoon light, the same as it had for 15 years. "Funny you should mention miracles," Grace said. "I'd like to tell you a story about a little girl named Emily, about 7 people who were dying and found reasons to live, about how sometimes the greatest miracles come from the simplest acts of care." Lillian turned her head, slightly curious despite her despair. Grace began to talk. She told Lillian about Bobby, about learning that love could survive death, about Emily and the promise that had shaped her life, about Jack and Evelyn and Marcus and Theodore and Claire and all the others, about David and how the people she had saved him in return. "The thing is," Grace said, leaning forward, "I learned something through all of this. Miracles aren't about one person giving everything until they have nothing left. Miracles are about creating circles of care, about love flowing out and coming back, about building a community that refuses to let anyone face their darkness alone." She placed the medallion on Lillian's bedside table, not giving it away permanently, but offering it as a symbol, a reminder. "This medallion has been part of 8 miracles, 8 people who were dying and decided to live, not because of magic, not because of some supernatural power, but because someone showed up, someone believed, someone created a space where healing could happen." "Why are you telling me this?" Lillian asked. "Because you're going to be miracle number 9, and then you're going to help create miracle number 10. That's how this works. That's how light spreads, one person at a time, refusing to let the darkness win." Grace stood, preparing to leave. She had other patients to visit, other families to support. Her work was just beginning. "Wait," Lillian called. "Will you come back tomorrow?" "Every day," Grace promised. "You're not alone in this, Lillian. Not anymore." Grace left room 412 and walked down the hallway of Sacred Heart Hospital. Her hospital now in a way it had never been before. She passed cleaning staff nurses, doctors. Some nodded to her, some smiled. She was no longer invisible, but more importantly, she was no longer alone. In her office, Grace found David waiting. He had made a full recovery and returned to his job, but he visited the hospital regularly now. Sometimes to see Grace, sometimes to volunteer in the pediatric ward reading to children the way Grace had once read to Emily. "Hey, Mom," he stood embracing her. The distance that had defined their relationship for years had vanished, replaced by a closeness neither had known was possible. "What brings you by?" "Jennifer called. She wants to try again, to work on our marriage. She said, watching you and watching everyone who showed up for us. It made her realize what matters, that community, that showing up, that's what makes life worth living." Grace felt her eyes fill with tears, happy tears this time. "I'm so glad." "Me too. And Mom, I've been thinking about Emily, about the medallion, about this promise you made." "What about it?" "I want to help. I want to be part of the circle. I'm good with computers. I could set up a foundation, coordinate volunteers, help you do what you do but bigger, better, so you never have to sacrifice yourself like that again." Grace looked at her son, seeing Bobby in his face, seeing Emily's legacy, seeing the future she had built without knowing she was building it. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like that very much." That evening, Grace returned to her apartment. It was no longer empty. David and Jennifer had helped her buy new furniture. The 7 families she had saved had pitched in, refusing to let her live in the sparse space that had reflected her years of sacrifice. Now there was a couch, a dining table, photographs on the walls. Bobby's picture had a place of honor, but beside it were new photos. Grace with the 7 families, Grace and David, Grace receiving her patient advocate credentials. A life, not just a purpose, but an actual life. Grace made herself tea and sat by the window looking out at the Boston skyline. The medallion lay on the table beside her, and she picked it up, holding it to the light. "Emily," she whispered, "I kept my promise. 9 people saved. But more than that, I learned what you were trying to teach me, that saving people isn't about destroying yourself. It's about creating connections, building community, showing others how to carry the light so you don't have to carry it alone." The medallion seemed to pulse with warmth in her hand, or maybe it was just her imagination. Either way, Grace felt at peace. The next morning, she would return to room 412, would sit with Lillian Ward and begin the patient work of helping another person find their way back from the edge. But she wouldn't do it alone. Jack would visit, sharing his story. Rachel would bring legal expertise if insurance became an issue. Marcus would consult on medications. The circle would expand, as it always did. And somewhere Grace believed Emily Rose Bennett was smiling, because the promise had been kept. Not the way Grace had originally understood it, burning herself up trying to save everyone, but in a better way, a sustainable way. By teaching others to be the light, by creating a community of people who refuse to let anyone face their darkness alone. Grace Callahan had spent 15 years learning how to save others, and in the process she had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the person who needs saving most is the one doing all the saving. And sometimes the greatest miracle is learning to let yourself be loved. Grace set down her tea and picked up her phone. She had calls to make, families to check on, volunteers to coordinate, a foundation to help David build. Work that mattered. Work that would continue long after she was gone. But for now, just for this moment, Grace allowed herself to simply sit, to breathe, to feel the weight of the medallion in her hand and know that she had honored Emily's memory in the best way possible, not by destroying herself, but by lighting the way for others. The story of Grace Callahan, the cleaning lady who saved lives, had become something larger. A story of community, of redemption, of learning that the strongest form of love isn't sacrifice that leaves nothing behind. It's sacrifice that plants seeds, that grows into something beautiful, that continues long after the first act of grace is past. In room 412, Lillian Ward touched the medallion on her bedside table. She didn't understand it yet, didn't know the history it carried, but she could feel something in the metal, A promise, a possibility. Tomorrow Grace would return, would sit with her, would show her what it meant to fight when you couldn't fight for yourself, would introduce her to the circle of 7 who had become 8, who would become 9, and the light would continue to spread. One person at a time, one act of grace at a time, one miracle at a time until the darkness couldn't stand against it anymore.